All right, I think it's time to get started. Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to 2026. I'm glad I remembered to actually update the year on this slide. Most years I forget when the year changes over. But yeah, thanks for joining the Oqtane Community Stand-Up to kick off 2026. I'm going to cover a little bit about 2025 and some of the activities that happened during last year. I'm going to talk a bit about the most recent release updates, recent events related to Oqtane that have occurred in the community, and we'll have some time for discussion. So 2025 was a busy year again for Oqtane. We had 12 official releases that didn't actually break down to one every month, but if you average it out, it did. We had 602 pull requests, so lots of contributions from various folks. 1,321 commits over the year, and 156 issues that were logged in the repository were resolved. And some of the key highlights of like new enhancements and features that were added to the framework in 2025. I think the biggest one may be the Oqtane application template, which was a significant amount of work. It took probably 2 or 3 months to kind of finalize a version that actually worked well in all the environments it was expected to. It greatly simplifies the onboarding for people who want to take advantage of Oqtane for building applications. It follows the Blazor sort of standard approach for doing software development, especially in regards to dependency management, like for consuming NuGet packages. And so it was a significant improvement over the development model that was available previously. That previous model, of course, is still available, primarily for those folks who are building reusable modules or themes that you expect to share across different installations of Oqtane. So that approach of building standalone sort of modules or themes that are packaged up as NuGet packages is still very applicable to a lot of folks. But if you're building a standalone Oqtane application, which is not expected to be shared with multiple installations, then the new template is great for that. From a user perspective, we keep adding additional capabilities to Oqtane. In .NET 10, Microsoft added passkey support or passwordless authentication. And so that was integrated into Oqtane as well in the Oqtane 10 release. In addition, there was the ability to log in via a link, a unique link, time-sensitive link that's sent by email. So that was added more recently. Settings management, so a new UI so that you can see all of the different settings for the different entities that are available in the system. You can manage them. You can use that settings management UI for populating master data that you can take advantage of in your Oqtane applications. So just a sort of a general purpose UI that is quite useful. We decided to introduce the RADS and rich text editor because it had much greater functionality than the previous editor that we had been using for rich text editing. Had much better support for HTML in particular. So if you're building HTML based websites, the previous editor was a little challenged when it came to formatting HTML. Wasn't really designed for that. That editor was called Quill. So Quill.js is still available as an editor in the framework for those people who want to use it, but the RADS and editor has much more functionality. We also added time zone support to the framework during 2025. So the ability for a site to specify what time zone it operates in, for users to specify what time zones they're located in, and then the framework can make the necessary conversions for dates and times when you're viewing information in the UI. We also migrated from using the legacy mail library or SMTP library that was provided through the .NET Core, which I guess was officially deprecated a while ago. It is receiving no further enhancements or updates. And Microsoft recommends using a third-party component called MailKit. So we integrated MailKit in 2025. And then we also took advantage of some of the new functionality that MailKit offers. And so we were able to introduce the modern authentication approach for SMTP using OAuth 2, which and during 2025, there was a number of major email providers that started enforcing OAuth-only authentication for SMTP, like Microsoft in particular. We added cookie consent functionality to sites, which you can easily enable. And along with that, we introduced sort of standard privacy and terms for websites when you scaffold them, because most websites need a privacy and terms page. We introduced static asset caching. So for those types of assets which don't change, that are typically part of the framework or could be part of third-party modules or themes. We added caching capabilities for those, which greatly improves performance of websites. We added user impersonation. That was actually way back almost a year ago now. So that if you're, testing, sometimes it's nice to be able to test on behalf of another user and see exactly what they're experiencing. So basically being able to log in as them with their roles and basically being able to interact with the system as if you were that user. It's very important for QA kind of activities. And of course, in November, when .NET 10 shipped from Microsoft, we provided a new version of Oqtane and also migrated our version number so that it is in alignment with the .NET releases now. So Oqtane 10 was released with .NET 10 in November. So a lot of activity happened in 2025. As part of my role with the .NET Foundation Project Committee, we keep track of the activity of open source projects that are part of the .NET Foundation. And so this is the community project, so those projects that are not maintained by Microsoft. And so for 2025, we had a lot of activity in comparison to other open source projects. We were still in the top 5 most active projects in the .NET Foundation in terms of pull requests and commits. So that was good to see. If we compare that to 2024, we actually went down a little bit in terms of activity. So in 2024, we had slightly higher pull requests and more commits, but very happy still with 2025 and how much activity was generated by the community in terms of enhancing the open source project. So 10.01, the 10.01 release was released on December 15th, so right near the end of the year. It had 38 pull requests, 118 commits that were part of it, and those came from 5 different contributors, so people who contributed pull requests to that release. Some of the highlights of 10.01 was that it was updated to the latest .NET SDK, the 10.01 SDK, which was released in early December. I'm expecting that there'll be a 10.02 SDK that's released fairly soon because it's been about a month. Also, as part of that release, we implemented the improved 404 handling that was available as one of the new features in Blazor in .NET 10. We had to do a little extra work to get it to get it integrated and working in Oqtane, just because Oqtane is a more complex and sophisticated application than some of the examples of where this had been implemented in documentation that we were able to find. So actually Microsoft helped in terms of how to utilize this feature within a more complex application like Oqtane, and so that was great to be able to include that. We also introduced a setting in the site settings so that you can enable or disable enhanced navigation. Enhanced navigation is obviously a feature that is paired with static rendering. So by default in Blazor, when you're using static rendering, there's a feature called enhanced navigation, and it is by default enabled. And essentially what that means is it allows a statically rendered Blazor application to behave more like a single page application. So it's intended to provide better response times, like so better interactivity for users. However, there are some downsides to it, in that it kind of interferes sometimes with the behavior of JavaScript. And so if you are developing applications and want to use sort of extensive JavaScript, you can actually disable enhanced navigation when you're using static rendered Blazor, and then you can use JavaScript libraries just like you would in MVC or Razor Pages or any other framework, without any modifications. So it's especially if you're building websites and you're used to taking advantage of a lot of JavaScript functionality. You can sometimes just turn off the enhanced navigation, and it will save you a lot of time in terms of like migrating websites to Oqtane. We also introduced a forgot username capability. So often when you have a user account, you may forget your password. So we always had forgot password functionality. But you can also, of course, forget your username if you don't often use a site. And so we added the ability so that you can enter your email address and it'll actually send you your username if you have a registered account. We also added the ability to have a login link capability, which allows you to basically enter your email address and it'll send you a time-sensitive link via email, which you can click on and you'll be automatically kind of logged into the site. You see this a lot lately with a lot of consumer-facing sites that just are trying to make or take away some of the friction around authenticating. And so this capability is useful for some people to expose in their sites. 10.03, and I'm obviously jumping here from 10.01 to 10.03, and that was because when 10.02 was released, and I think it was released on December 23rd, it was discovered that there was actually like an upgrade issue related to a migration of adding a column to the database that didn't have the proper nullable attribute. And as a result of that, like new installations worked fine, but upgrades would be a problem. And so it was immediately replaced with a 10.03 release on December the 24th. 10.03 had 19 pull requests, 35 commits, and those came from a couple of contributors. There were some issues sometimes with modules that had certain types, like there was the iModule interface that was part of it. And there was obviously the ability to specify the business controller class that was part of it, or the manager class. And if you had specified a type for that actually didn't exist in your installation, in Oqtane 10, it would throw an exception during startup, and it would actually prevent the framework from starting up successfully. And so that's obviously a big problem. It would actually throw an ASP.NET error, which was kind of cryptic, and you'd wonder why your site wasn't starting up as you were expecting it to. And so that logic was changed so that the error or the exception related to that module was logged to the exception log, but it now does not prevent the framework from starting up. So that was an improvement that was made for migrating in 10.03, which hopefully allows people to have more successful upgrades. When Oqtane 10 was released as well, there was obviously Oqtane supports multiple databases, and so there were certain databases that had full support when .NET 10 was released, and there were other databases that did not have sort of full .NET 10 support. The Postgres provider did not have a native .NET 10 version available when .NET 10 was released, or when Oqtane 10 was released. And so in 10.03, the new version of the Postgres provider was included, but modification also had to be made to Oqtane related to the new passkey table to get the migrations to work properly. And so that fix was included. SQLite had for a long time also had a bit of a limitation in that SQLite in older version does not allow the dropping of columns. And so uh, for many, I guess, releases of Octane where a column needed to be dropped from a database table, because of this limitation around the SQLite database provider, we would actually have to retain the columns um, in our models and things and just not refer that, like not reference them. But they were like zombie columns, I would call them, that were still in the database and not being used, but they only were there because of this SQLite limitation that columns could not be dropped. Um, and so in Octane 10.03, we discovered that there is a way actually to drop columns with newer versions of SQLite. So any version of SQLite, I think after the year 2021, actually has support for dropping columns. And so in our custom SQLite abstraction that we have in Octane, we were able to implement the modern way of dropping columns, which isn't supported natively by EF Core. And so that actually resolved this problem. And so we were able to go back and remove all of the so-called zombie columns that we had been sort of carrying along as baggage for a while. And so this is a benefit to the framework, but also to anybody who's building modules that need to support multiple databases. We also made some improvements to page management. So there were page management user experience improvements. And then also passkey and login link user experience improvements, basically to retain the return URL, much the same way that the interactive login works today. There were some improvements around that. And then also related to the 404 handling, which I mentioned earlier, if there are 404s that are occurring when someone is navigating maybe from a link on another site, it's sometimes nice to know where that broken link is coming from. And so that is sometimes offered through the referrer. And so that is now being captured for broken links in the cases where it's available. So 10.04 is going to be released tomorrow. It has very few things in it at this point, but there's one major item that needs to be included in a release, and there was a pull request that was merged related to the notification job in 10.01. And that pull request actually, I think it was submitted maybe based on a misunderstanding of the way that the SMTP configuration was supposed to work. And so when the PR was reviewed, the change in behavior was not noticed. And so this actually has an effect on the default settings for sending emails. And so that needed to be rolled back. And so that PR has been rolled back and replaced with the previous functionality. And in particular, the setting that was causing confusion was related to a setting in site settings called relay configured. There was help text related to this setting that was intended to help clarify what its purpose was. But I guess not everyone reads the help text, of course. It's like reading documentation. And so ultimately in this release, we've renamed it now to use Open Relay, which is really what that feature was intended for. So by default, most installations should not set this setting because Octane has always supported relays. You just, like a relay like SendGrid, you specify the username and the password. And then the send from email, and it's always worked fine that way. You don't need to set this additional setting to say that your relay is configured. This was always intended for those very rare scenarios where you have full control over the email addresses that your registered users are all using, and that you've set up your email domains properly so that they're not flagged as spam, or you're using an open relay, which you really shouldn't be using. Yeah, so that's the intent of that change. MySQL was another database that Oqtane supports. And at the time that Oqtane 10 was released, the database provider that Oqtane uses called Pomelo was not yet available for .NET 10. And so as a result of that, like Oqtane 10 did not support MySQL. There is another database provider for MySQL called which is actually officially from MySQL, the company. So there was an attempt to migrate to that provider. However, it was discovered that the new .NET Identity passkey capability was not compatible with that provider. So internally, the .NET Identity passkey was using a feature of EF Core to map basically a structure to JSON, which is stored into a string column in the database. And I guess that's more of an obscure feature that the MySQL Entity Framework Core provider doesn't support yet. And so because of that, it would throw an exception. And so the solution ended up being that we had to add conditional logic so that when you're installing Oqtane on MySQL, um, it won't be able to support passkeys currently. Whereas if you're installing Oqtane on any other database, SQL Server, Postgres, or SQLite, the new passkey capability will be available. This issue has been reported to Microsoft, that there's an issue that's been logged in the ASP.NET Core repo. But I wouldn't expect that it'll be fixed before .NET 11. So for now, we need to kind of have a workaround for this so that people can use MySQL with Oqtane. And so this was the solution. As far as demonstration, I didn't really have much prepared that I was going to demonstrate, but I can show you. We can pull up an installation of Oqtane. So this is just a default installation with 10.04. Let's see if I'm running 10.04. Yes, I'm running 10.04. All right, and so maybe if we wanted to look at maybe the new 404 handling, so let's say if someone came to my site and it had bad dash URL, right? So a URL that has no route that's defined for it. It redirects me to this friendly page, which I can, I have the full ability through the UI to change the content of this page, right? So it doesn't just say not found. I have the ability to change any of the content on this page to make it into a friendly page. But behind the scenes, it has registered that broken link. If I go to broken URLs, like bad URL, I can see how many times that bad URL link has been requested, when it was last requested. And then if that link was actually on another website and I had followed it to this website, the referrer, your URL, would be logged as well. So I would know where the bad link is coming from. So this is just really helpful if you have broken links, like if you have, 404s that are happening on your site, you want to know where they're coming from. The main feature that was introduced in .NET 10 for Blazor was that previously in Blazor, if there was a 404 encountered, you'd be redirected to that friendly page. So if I go to the bad URL again, you get redirected to this page, but the status code would be reported as a 302, so a redirect, which isn't, obviously proper HTTP status code for what just happened. It should be reporting a 404. So in Blazor, in .NET 10, Microsoft fixed that. And so it's now, when a bad URL is encountered, you'll get redirected to the friendly page, but a 404 status code is going to be sent back to the client that requested it. So that's the main feature around 404 handling that was improved. We go into site settings and we go down into the UI component settings. We can now see that there is a new option for enhanced navigation. So if I'm running with render mode static, then we'll have this new option presented and I can change it to turn off enhanced navigation if I want to. And like I said, this is like very handy if you're building websites and you want to be able to take advantage of JavaScript libraries without any hassle, just using them in the standard way. If you turn off enhanced navigation, basically this is making Blazor behave as if it were an MVC or Razor page application, right? It's not behaving as a spa. It's not doing any magic. It's just doing the standard like request response model. And in some scenarios, that's exactly what you want. So that's why we have that feature now that you can enable. Also, I think I mentioned the SMTP option. So if I go into the SMTP options, we can see now that this option has now been renamed to Open Relay to make it clear that you probably shouldn't be enabling this unless you have very specific configuration in your environment that you're trying to achieve. All right, so if I log out for a moment and I go to log in and I have forgotten my password for this site, I also have the option now that, oh, I don't even know what my username is. So I can say forgot username. I can enter my email address and hit send, and it would send me a link if I'm registered on this site and there's an account that matches my email, and it'll send me my username. So that's the forgot username feature. So if I log in, if we go into user management and in settings, of course, we have a lot of user management type settings that are available. If I want to enable login link, this is how I can do it. I can specify that, yes, I want to have a login link capability on my site. Similarly, of course, I think I've demonstrated this before. This is where you would enable passkey support as well, and various other, login related settings. So if I save that, so my settings have been saved and I log out again and I say I want to log in, we now have this use login link option that is displayed. And if I click that, I can enter my email address. It'll send me a link in my email that I can click and it'll log me straight into the site. So obviously not a feature that everyone wants to take advantage of, but it is quite useful, especially in consumer-facing applications. So if I log in again, and maybe I enter my password correctly. The other thing I would maybe like to show is in page management. Well, so if we go to site settings, we've always had sort of the main settings for a site are at the top here, and then you can specify, what theme that you're using for this site, and then some different options related to the appearance of the site. And so in page management, we'll see that it's now been also modified to sort of be consistent with site management. Used to have a huge list of options all in the default sort of visibility, and now this has been trimmed down to the most general ones for a page. Now we have a theme section and we have an appearance section. So that was another change that was made in, I guess, 10.03, just to reorganize these options and make them a little bit more intuitive. And maybe I think that that's all I'm going to demonstrate for now. So back to slides. And so on November 10th, so this is a while ago now, a few months ago, this was just before .NET Conf, like so that same week as .NET Conf, the .NET Foundation had a a one-day summit where some of the open source projects that were part of the foundation could showcase their capabilities. And so that recording is available if anyone wants to watch it. On November 14th, which was actually part of .NET Conf, I did a presentation on .NET Scores a Perfect 10, and it was largely based on the experiences of migrating Oqtane to .NET 10. So that recording is also available. And then in December, I also did a sort of an official Oqtane 10 launch webinar, and that was with Dan Roth, who joined as a co-presenter for that. I mean, we've been very lucky to have Dan Roth as such a great supporter of Oqtane over time. He also joined us in our Oqtane 9 launch webinar. Or sorry, not Oqtane 9, Oqtane 6 for .NET 9. But yeah, so that video has been posted. I believe it was just posted this morning. And so that is available now for anyone who wants to watch it as well. So 2026, I kind of looked at a lot of the different features that I've made notes of over time that are not yet implemented in Oqtane. And I've kind of summarized the ones that I think are the most relevant that probably will be hopefully implemented in 2026. On that list would be content localization. So of course, Octane's always supported the static localization capability. So you can have, you can translate the user interface from the perspective of the admin, like labels and help text and things like that, into localized versions in different languages. But as far as content is concerned, it doesn't have a content localization solution. And so that is something that I believe should be implemented in 2026. I also want to explore if there's perhaps a simpler way of dealing with JavaScript registration in the framework. Right now, because Octane supports, static rendering, interactive rendering, and there's like differences between how those work in Blazor. The logic inside the framework to handle all of those differences is quite a lot. And I'm thinking there may be a simpler way of handling this. I'm not sure if it's actually feasible or not, because a lot of work went into getting the JavaScript registration implementation to work as it is right now. But that's more of like an exploration project. Scale out has been on the list for a while. And scale out is basically the ability to have multiple instances of an Octane site installed on sort of, in different environments that are working together. You could maybe refer to this as a web farm, I guess, in sort of legacy terminology. But the idea is that you are scaling out your application across a wider scope of infrastructure. And in order to do that, there's a number of enhancements that are required. Because right now, all of the content that you upload to Octane is stored on the local file system of that instance. And so there has to be a notion of folder providers so that you can store those in a different location, so that you could have multiple instances of Octane that point at another location to get files and content. Caching also needs the ability to be scaled out. Right now, it's using the .NET memory cache, which is great for a single sort of environment, but doesn't really scale that cache out across multiple environments. So we'd have to improve caching, and there's a whole lot of other little improvements that would also be as part of this scale out. So I'm hoping we can tackle that in 2026. Obviously, people are using AI more and more now for building applications. They want to be able to build AI native features into their applications, and they want to be able to take advantage of AI like coding practices and when they're building applications. And so hoping to add some additional AI capabilities to Octane in 2026 just to make it easier to use in that way. Obviously, marketplace improvements are constant, and then I definitely am going to be introducing a commercial support option for Oqtane in 2026. This was mentioned for 2025, but there were certain sort of things that happened for me personally in 2025 that I kind of this got pushed off. But in 2026, this will be something that becomes available. So roadmap, like I said, there'll be a version 10.04 that's released tomorrow, which has a few minor, like a few fixes in it that need to be introduced. And then beyond 10.04, I'm not sure yet whether there'll be a 10.05 or a 10.1 release. It really depends on, I guess, what features can be accomplished in January. So we'll take a look after that. And then as far as like next meeting, we'll be meeting for our next community stand-up for Oqtane in early February. So Wednesday, February 4th. Our community stand-ups are always on Wednesdays. So they're always at noon on the first Wednesday of each month. All right. And so with that, I am going to come back to the chat. And right. Okay. And Lee wants everybody to be aware that he has already put together some information about how to use Oqtane with AI. This would be from a software development perspective. Um, so obviously, a lot of it has to do with, what using the proper context, using the appropriate prompts, and the AI tooling is getting better and better all the time. I'm sure that most of you have, had some experience with using AI at this point. In particular, like using tools like Cursor. It's pretty incredible. You just have to be patient and kind of approach it in an iterative way, right? Like be very specific in what you're asking for. If it doesn't give you exactly what you're looking for, ask again, be more specific. And it'll get you a large, like a good portion of where you want to go in terms of implementation, and then you can review and fine tune. I mean, I expect that in 2026, just AI software development is going to hit the mainstream um, because it is such a valuable tool in your toolbox. All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. I guess that is it then. So we will adjourn a bit early today, but thanks everybody for joining. Again, Happy New Year, and we will chat again in early February. Thank you.